consumers, and that violations of consumer safety standards by producers or suppliers are appropriately sanctioned, and relevant civil criminal defenses to such violations are available to defendants.
Right, and you mentioned some things that, ensuring the protection of life and health and safety of consumers. Now, there is a Department of Consumer Affairs, which basically has to do with, you're not just going to have a bill, but there's actually a department to carry out the work of what the bill speaks about. Now, Trista, the role of the Department of Consumer Affairs, what would you say it is?
Mr. Williams, I would say to not only protect the consumers, but to educate them also. Consumer affairs is not about pricing alone, as most persons would think. We deals with pricing. When we were here the last time, we stressed and we mentioned to everyone that consumer affairs main purpose, one of the main purposes, is to educate persons on their rights and responsibilities. The supermarkets, as we keep getting complaints of, we tell them that the supermarkets has a markup range, and once they stick within the markup range, there's nothing we can do pertaining to the pricing. Take, for example, supermarket A might have its markup to be 15%, from 9 to 15%. Some supermarkets might take the 9%, some might take the 15%. So once they stay within that range, and it all depends on the price that they purchase the items for. So the markup would consist of the price that they purchase for, the shipping and insurance, and of course their profit margin. So the department's main function, one of the main functions, is to educate persons on their rights and responsibilities as being a consumer.
That is important. So through education, the person would know what their responsibilities are and what their rights are.
Yes.
And they can seek redress.
Yes, they can.
If their rights are infringed.
Yes, they can.
Now, who do they seek redress to? Do you have a board? Do you have a body to which people can file complaints?
Well, this is what the Act is here for now. Within the Act, there would be a tribunal, a board, that persons can seek redress. When they come to our department, they would lodge complaints, and if it is not something that we ourselves as officers can resolve, then the board would take place. So the Act, for this Act of Consumer Protection 2021, is very, very important. So it would guide us, our department, in the form of having a board put in place, so all these things can be redressed.
Okay. Now, Mr. Quealy, the Act speaks to, not the Act, the bill that is before the House, speaks to the disclosure of price for products and services. What is that?
Well, one of the fundamental rights of being a consumer is the right to information. When consumers go into a business place to conduct business, one of the things that they must know outright is what is the price of an item. You cannot have an item for sale and not have a price affixed to it, or have the price on the shelf under it. When we go into supermarkets, many of the items there, we would see them on the shelf and they have no price next to them or on them. And when you get to the cash point now, you get this astronomical price sometimes. And you never know how much money is in a person's pocket. So they have to get the information before they reach to the cash point. So in the Act itself, it speaks to disclosure of price for goods or service. And it states, a supplier shall not display goods for sale or offer to supply any service without displaying a price in relation to the goods or service, unless the display is designed or intended predominantly for advertisement, or is in a place in the store where it is not accessible to customers.
Yeah, the other day, Mr. Quayle, I was at a particular supermarket. I would not call the name of that supermarket. It's a big supermarket. And I picked up an item from the shelf. There was a price that was there for the item, but when I got to the cashier, and when I got my, when she said the total of the goods that I had, I realized something had to be wrong. And so the price that was on the good, on the shelf, there was a different price in the computer. And so therefore, she said, well, it's a good thing I was paying attention. And she said, well, let me call for the supervisor. And she called for the supervisor. And I said, you know, I picked up this good based on the price and the price that is on the shelf. So now that I reached to the cashier to have a different price, I have been misled.
You know,
and therefore the supervisor said, direct me to the shelf. I went to the shelf, and there was the price, different price to what was in the computer. Now, if I was not paying attention, and some people are not paying attention as consumers, then I would have been, you know, picking up something under the impression that it cost this amount when I'm paying something else.
in a situation like that, though, you would be entitled to pay whatever price was on the item or next to the item as you saw it on the shelf.
And that is what I paid. So the supervisor said I would pay the price that was on the shelf and not the price that was in the computer. And they had to adjust it.
And I want to make one more point. In relation to these infractions, one major step up, I would say, in terms of this bill from what we have right now, is that we would be able to issue fines once we are conducting inspections and we find that you are not complying with what the Act has in it. All right? So fines for this sort of infraction is like $2,000. So persons need to be aware of this, because in the past we would just be speaking to you, trying to educate you, but the situation continues, so we have to go to another step right now.
Yeah, Mr. Quayle, you mentioned back to that point of disclosure of price for products and services. What do you do in the case of, I can understand that, you know, some of these bigger supermarkets and shops, retail, you know, and so on, they would have prices on their products, next to their products. What do you do when you go to a retail shop in your village and there's no price on the sardine or the tin of Vienna sausages? The shopkeeper just says, well, this is what it costs.
Well, when you go to a small shop, it would depend on the size of the shop. There are small supermarkets. We would expect them to still have their prices on the shelf the same way as the bigger supermarkets. The small mom and pop shop, as we say, we would encourage them to still have their prices displayed. They could put the price up with a piece of paper or write it on tape and display it to the public. It doesn't matter your size of establishment in this regard. You would still have to give the consumer information on the price for the product.
Yes, and that is so important in terms of the right of the consumer to know what the price of a good or a service is. Because in the absence of that, you can call any price.
Right.
You can call any price. Now, the receipt my guarantee that I bought something at your store. In the absence of that, what recourse do I have? Twister.
Mr. Williams, in the case of your receipts, as you indicated just a while ago, that is a legal binding document to prove that, yes, we did indeed purchase this item from your store. Before time, we used to make sure that we ask the suppliers to have this done. Some used to tell us that they don't have it in their system. You know, they would prefer to do a handwritten receipt, but they can also do that. But in the Act now, we used to have it before, but it's more strengthening now, that a supplier of goods and services shall provide a written record for each transaction to the consumers for whom goods and services is supplied. The record must have the supplier's name or the registered business name. As you know, some of them have the VAT number, so that can be used. The address and the premises of where the goods and services was supplied from, the date, the name and description of the goods or services that they supplied, the unit price for each of the goods and services, the quantity, the total price, the amount in terms of the taxes, the total price of the entire transaction. And if this isn't done, the bill that is before the House, there are fines in place. So if there's no if and but and maybe, it must be done. You know, from the cash register, most of the businesses would give you, when you get the printout, because they're VAT related, you would have that information there, right? But when you go to a normal store, sometimes they just give you a punch up a receipt and that's it. But they must supply this information to you. And the Act is saying this, and of course, if this does not happen, there are also fines in place.
Why is it so important, Mr. Quayle, to have that information? Apart from me just having something to say, well, look, I bought this at this particular store. And so therefore, if it is faulty, I can go back to that store. Why is it so important?
Well, the sales record is your proof of purchase. You need this document, as you said, in case there's something faulty with the equipment that you bought and you need to return it, or you may need to do an exchange. It's also a way of elevating the way of doing business in St. Kitts, I would say. We need to step away from the old norm where we just give somebody something in the hand and take the money. You need to have proper documentation of your sales, as we said, for inland revenue purposes, and also for consumer purposes. You never know what could happen with a product, and the person may need to come back to your establishment for your assistance.
Yes, and last week, Mr. Laplace said something extremely important, that sometimes goods are recalled.
Right.
And you have to know from where you got the particular product and the batch number and all of that sort of a thing, so that they can all be removed. All those goods can be removed if they're a threat to people's safety, a threat to people's life, a threat to people's health.
Yes, that is true. But with the receipt, you would not have this information on the receipt itself. We would have to actually research those sort of cases online, like on FDA food recall services. Food and Drug Administration of America, they have a recall section, and we will have to investigate the case on there and find the batch number specific to that item. And our officers would go into the field and see if they could locate this particular item and remove it from the store shelves. So, but they still not be included on the receipt itself.
Right. Now, I know that you mentioned in terms of disclosure of price for products and services. What about the disclosure of certain types of products? For example, if it's used, if you're selling me something that is used as though it is new, or selling me something that is reconditioned or rebuilt or refurbished, do I have a right to know that what I am buying is not brand new, but it would have gone through certain stages and so on?
Of course, the consumer would have to know everything about that product, because if you don't, you're going down the road of misleading and deceptive conduct. You're trying to persuade the consumer that this item is new, nothing has ever happened to it, and you know that somebody might have had it and damaged it and you repaired it. So you need to be upfront and tell the consumer what is the real state of the product. And once they know it's reconditioned or it was used, they would not be able to come back and decide like they want a refund or they want to exchange it, because they would not be under the premise that it is new. They knew that it was used. So when you sell someone a used product, you have to indicate to them it is used, it is in a certain condition, these are the faults with it, so they cannot come back and try to claim compensation for anything.
Because I have heard of some, for example, electronic places that sell electronics, computers, phones, and things like that, that they do not actually tell you that this is a refurbished phone or this is a refurbished computer. It looks brand new, but it was used before and fixed up, refurbished, and so on.
You still have to indicate that to the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is where they mislead people. Now, in terms of electrical goods, I buy, for example, a fan, and I have to return that fan because after 2 weeks, for example, the motor goes in the fan. What are the conditions on which I can return electrical goods, and what can I expect from the supplier in terms of a response?
You have 30 days to return an electrical item if it becomes faulty in your possession. 30 days should be enough time for it to manifest itself if it actually has an issue. The store owner, of course, they may think that you did something to the item. So it would have to be proven that the consumer themselves did not damage the item. Once that has been established, the supplier would have 7 days to repair this item. If they cannot repair it within 7 days, they would have to give the consumer a replacement item to use in the meantime. If the consumer does not want a replacement item and they just want to get their money back, you will have to follow through on that because they paid your money. They do not have the good in their position to use, so you would have to refund them their money if they don't want anything else from your establishment. That's about it on the electrical return.
Suppose I am paying for a service. Do I have a right to know in terms of the person who is providing the service and if they are qualified to provide that service?
Well,
somebody comes to me and says, well, look, I'm a massage therapist. I am providing the service as a massage therapist. Do I just trust the word of that person, or do I have a right to know what makes you a massage therapist?
That would depend on the situation, I would say. If you're hiring the person to do a job, of course, they would have to supply you with their credentials to show that they are certified in certain areas. Now, if you're on the beach and somebody shows up to give you a massage, asking for their credentials right there on the spot, I don't think that is going to happen. So it would depend on the situation. But within the confines of the Act, we do not have anything stating specifically that someone would have to provide you with their credentials. But it would be nice, as I was saying earlier, with the right to information. So, yeah, it would be nice if they would provide you with that, but we do not actually regulate that sort of stuff.
What if a person is selling goods that are faulty and a complaint is made that a person is selling faulty goods? What would the department do?
You will have to come to the department, fill out a complaint form. Our investigations officers will look into the issue to see if there's any merit to the claim. Persons would always complain and say various things, but then when you actually look into it, there's nothing really there. But faulty goods, they would have to be taken to someone who can actually verify that the good is actually faulty. Our officers within the department would have to seek assistance from an external source, someone who is familiar with these sort of items, repairing electrical products if it is that, to see if the item actually has a fault or the fault is based off of consumer negligence. Because persons buy products and they do all sorts of manner of stuff with them, and then when they destroy them, they go back to the stores with them and say that the item is faulty. So, although we are trying to protect the interests of consumers, we also have to protect the interests of the businesses as well. So,
right. The unconscionable conduct. And what do I mean by that? Force, coercion. How is that dealt with in the Act? In the bill, rather?
well, it is illegal to coerce or force anyone into a transaction. We have situations here where consumers may show up at an establishment. I don't want to call any establishment's name. They may show up at an establishment and they're trying to clear some packages. And they're being told, you cannot get a particular package until you take all. Now, this might be the first time that they're hearing this. We do not know how much money is in this person's pocket at the time. So to say that right there on the spot when the person is at your establishment, that is a form of coercion. You're trying to strong arm them into getting them to do what you want them to do. Now we would understand that these courier services pay up front to customs to get the items in their warehouse. But although you're trying to recoup this money that you paid, you still have to give the consumer information beforehand so that they can know what their next move is. You cannot try to strong arm an individual into doing what you think they should do. And under the legislation, the fine for this sort of infraction is also $2,000.
But it would have to be proven.
Yes, it would have to be proven.
Yeah, that I was forced. That I was forced. The damaged goods sold to a consumer. If someone sells me damaged goods, knowing fully well that the goods are damaged, but not disclosing that to me, what happens in that situation?
That is misleading and deceptive conduct, as we mentioned earlier. You're trying to pass it off as the goods are of certain quality, certain standard, when you know it is actually not. But that will be a very tricky situation, because you would have to actually prove that the item was faulty. How do you know it was actually faulty? So the department might have to seek the assistance, as I mentioned earlier, of outside assistance from somebody who is capable of assessing the equipment that is in question, to make sure that the person did not damage it off their own and it actually has a manufacturing defect.
Now, does the bill deal with any sort of a price control? Because as it stands right now, I can buy something at Value Mart for $10 and I go to Best Buy and it is there for $20. The same item. How is that sort of a thing dealt with and controlled? There's such disparity in terms of pricing.
The department, and I must make it clear, the department does not have the power to regulate persons' prices or dictate persons' prices. And I'll just read a section here of the Act. Management of pricing. Subject to any other law that determines the price of any goods or service, a supplier may determine any scoring or other valuative mechanism or model to be used in managing or pricing goods or service offered by the supplier. And what this is basically saying is the supplier can fix their prices to their liking, all right? As long as it is not a situation where the goods in question is under price control or there's some other law dictating what the price should be, the merchant is able to set their prices at whatever they think is appropriate to recoup their costs and make a profit. Persons do not understand their power as consumers. When you're in the market for a product, if you see an item at store A and it costs $5 and you go to store B and it costs $10, why would you complain about the price at store B and then still buy it at store B? You're giving the store more power, I would say, to keep it at that price. If you go somewhere else, you exercise your choice and go somewhere else, there are two things that could happen to that product. They're either going to stop selling it or they're going to reduce the price because they don't want to lose all the money that they paid purchasing those items. So as consumers, we need to exercise choice, and in this hard economic time, we need to shop wisely and choose items that best suit our pocket.
Yeah, my mother was very good at that. You know, whenever when I was much younger and I would go to her to town and so on as a teenager, she would go from store to store, shop supermarket to supermarket looking at prices. But I never liked it. I find it was too time consuming and so on, but I see the wisdom in it.
I might add that, as you indicated, that you went by one supermarket, you have it for one price, and then another supermarket, it has another price. We still have to take into consideration that both suppliers might not have purchased the item at the same supplier. Then we still have to take into consideration the shipping and insurance.
Yes.
So those things we take into consideration, because the store that you saw it for $15 and another store has it for $25. The store for $15 might have gotten it, and when they add their markup, it reaches $15 because what they purchased it for, it was like $9. But the other store might have purchased it for $20. So we still have to take a lot of different things into consideration when we're thinking about pricing.
Okay. And while we're on pricing, what can you tell me about dual pricing? And why is this a concern?
Dual pricing, as you know, is when an item has two or more prices are fixed or attached to it. And of course, the consumers in the Consumer Affairs Act that we had present before, that we were working with before, and this one present now, it indicates that the consumers must, should, will, and will always pay the lower value of the two. So if you're a consumer, like what you did when you said you went to the supermarket the other
Yes.
day, that one price was on the shelf and the other one was in the system, you pay the law of the two, because that is how the act is. We ask suppliers and business owners to make sure that the correct price is in the system and also affixed to the item, beneath the item, or somewhere on the shelf that, you know, this is the price for this item. Now, when we go to the cash register, sometimes they swipe the item so fast that you don't even know. For me, sometimes, as a consumer affairs officer, it's sad to say, but sometimes I don't even have the time in terms of looking at it, which is bad. But I always would have my receipt. So sometimes I watch the price and I say, no, but that wasn't the price, you know. But still, I would make a note of it.
Yes.
So sometimes it depends on how, you know, busy the supermarket is. So what I would do when I get home, I would look at the price, because I know sometimes they would do things. I drop down my price, and when I reach home, I compare it to my receipt. If there's anything out of whack with the receipt, go back to the store. Sometimes what I would do, I would take a picture of the item. We had a situation one time with a lady. She had two prices. When she reached the cashier, it was a different price. But by the time when she went back, she didn't went right away. The price had already changed. Of course, you know, the supermarket is not going to say that she was correct. So we encourage persons, if you recognize this, take a picture. Have it as your evidence, have it as your proof, and then you can come to our department with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Suppose now that I ordered some goods, and I was promised in the contract that the goods will arrive at Friday before midday. The goods do not arrive. Is it fair to me? Nothing is said. I expected the goods before midday on Friday. That is what we agreed to. But the goods do not arrive. Nothing is said.
Let me clarify first. You're referring to something you purchased overseas or locally?
Locally.
Locally. Now, in a situation like that, it is fair that the suppliers, well, let me put it this way, it would be unfair to you, but in all fairness, the supplier should notify you of the change. They should notify you of the change. But we cannot, how must I put it, Mr. Quealy? We cannot force them to say exactly, you know, that the item would have come. They would have to tell you, disclose as to the reason why it's a change. They must disclose that information to you.
Yes, they must give you that information.
They must give you that information to you as to the reason why there's a change.
Especially if the person would already received payment. For that item.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Allow me to read a section on this. Non-delivery of goods or service on a contracted date. Where it can be proven that a supplier has contracted to provide goods or a service, and pursuant to that contract has received a deposit in cash or kind, and on the contracted delivery date is unable to deliver the goods or service, or demonstrate that the goods or service is in a reasonably advanced state of production without reasonable excuse, that supplier is deemed to have acted in a fraudulent manner and commits an offense. So they would need to inform you why the product has not been delivered to them, and they could negotiate another date if the consumer requests to have it delivered. But they must inform the consumer as to why the goods have not been delivered at the time. If they are unable to deliver them and the consumer decides they want a refund, they would have to refund the person because they did not live up to the obligation.
And the person, since the person has committed an offense, and I take the matter to the Consumer Board, Protection Board, can that supplier be fined?
Yes, they can, but we are structuring the bill in such a way that even if in the absence of the board, because even the current legislation that we're operating under right now, it makes provisions for the establishment of a board, but the board has never been constituted. So in an instance where the board is not in place in this new legislation, the officers of the department would be able to find that individual or company, because we're going to have ticket books like traffic wardens. So we're going to be all over collecting money.
What is pyramid selling? We often hear that term, pyramid selling. What is it? And it's a scheme. And why is it considered bad? Twister.
Number 127 of the Consumer Bill, that a person shall not, pyramid selling is that a person shall not promote, operate, or participate in a pyramid selling scheme. For the purposes of this section, the term pyramid selling scheme means a scheme that provides for a supply of goods or service or both for reward to many participants that constitutes primarily an opportunity to sell an investment or opportunity rather than an opportunity to supply goods or service, and is unfair or is likely to be unfair to many participants in that they would reap financial rewards at the end of the transaction.
Okay.
Sometime last year, or early this year, we had, persons sending persons to join this group, and when you pay $50 at the end, when you encourage other persons to join in, they would reap such and such amount of money. And to this day, some persons got their money and other persons didn't. So it is a way of persons, a fast of persons trying to encourage persons to hand over money to you. It's fraudulent. In our act, it's illegal. So we would encourage persons not to partake in these things.
The bill speaks to consumer rights, the rights of the consumer, and at the very same time it also speaks to the duties or the responsibilities of the supplier. Earlier you mentioned, Trista, that one of the functions of the Department of Consumer Affairs is to educate the consumer in terms of his or her rights as a consumer. And so that that person can understand their rights and to seek redress for the protection of those rights. Now, what are some of those consumer rights that the bill addresses?
Consumers has the right to have the right information, the correct information about the products. They also have the right to know if I purchase this product, would it be harmful to me? They have the right to know about the healthy aspect of the product if they're intaking the product. Consumer affairs, consumers must know what they're purchasing, the right to redress. How would you operate if I have a faulty product or was misled? How to handle this sort of redress? What should I do? It's more about educating yourself as to the aspect of what you must know when you're purchasing, how you're spending your money, and what if it is negative in terms of with something that would be harmful to you, what you can do. So you would have to educate yourself as to, if I purchase this and I don't read properly and I intake it, because you take medication, some would say harmful if it's swallowed. It's to be rubbed on your skin. And as long as you intake it in your mouth, what it would cause. These are things that you must know, what you should do from what you should not do. Educating yourself. And as Mr. Creeley indicated earlier, you go by store A. Store A has a product for $10. You go by another store, it has it for $15. You have it for $20, $25. It's within your right. It is your hard-earned money. Know how you're spending your money. You must have the knowledge as to, why am I spending here compared to. You must compare. You must know these things up front as to, what should I do with my money? Should I purchase it? We have the buying power, and that's all we're trying to tell persons. Educate yourself in terms of with knowing that I have the right to purchase this item. I have the right to refuse it. And as Mr. Creeley indicated earlier, that when the suppliers recognize that these items are not moving, they call a sale. The prices come down, or they will take them off the shelves.
What about labeling? Does the bill deal with labeling? Labeling is so important, because if I'm buying something, I must know what it is that I am buying. You mentioned before, in the absence of that, so how does the bill address the aspect of labeling, especially of goods?
Just like the Bureau of Standards, our bill, it also speaks to labeling. It would be required that you have all items that are being sold, they have an expiration date, manufacture date, the ingredients. You don't have to have the amount on there specifically, but you have to have the ingredients, because some persons may be allergic to certain ingredients. So it would be required that he has the ingredients on there, so persons could decide if they want to purchase this product or not. In an ideal situation, a UPC code for, as we mentioned earlier, traceability, if there becomes a product recall. The manufacturer of the product, and of course, as we mentioned, the price.
May I add that we walk around last year and we see numerous vendors selling their local products, local drinks, and we don't know exactly, they're not properly labeled. So the bill also make provision for them to have their items labeled. Actually, it's in the Bureau of Standards Act that it's a must, likewise for us.
Right, so I'm going to be selling my jams, I am going to be selling my pepper sauce and all of that. I am selling it, but yet there is no label on it in terms of what is in it. There is no expiration date. and things like that?
You must indicate to the consumer what the item is. And I don't want the public to think like the bill is intended to take money out of your pocket. You must look at it from the standpoint that we're elevating doing business, the standard of doing business. And when you do not have labels on your product, we have a lot of tourists coming to our shows. Well, once everything is back to normal, or when it was normal, you have tourists coming to the shows, and they may take up your product, they may look at it, they don't know what is in the bottle. So right there, you put yourself right out of the game because you lost a sale. The person may have bought it if they knew what was in the bottle. So it would be important and mandatory now, once this bill is in place, that labels are placed on packaged food products so that persons can be aware of what is in the item.
And we can also look at it as a form of marketing the person and their products. So.
I go back to how I started with that quote from Mahatma Gandhi, when he said that a customer is the most important visitor on our premises. Now, how can customer complaints help an organization?
That would depend on how open the business is to complaints. The consumer may see certain issues which affect them negatively in a business place and point it out to the store owner. But if the store owner is of the mindset that nothing is wrong with my business, I don't want to hear anything from you, they may not try to change anything about what the consumer is complaining about. And then what would happen is that consumer may end up going somewhere else.
So it's not a wise, that business person who owns the store, owns the supermarket, it is not wise for them to adopt that attitude.
Not at all. The consumers make and break your business, so you have to pay attention to what it is they're saying. If one customer leaves your business, you may not see it as any big deal, but then if other persons experiencing the same issue leave or stop supporting your business, then you're going to see a very sharp downturn in revenue for your business. So you need to pay attention to what your consumers, your customers are saying, because as I said, they make and they can break your business.
I often wonder, someone has a business, whether they're selling food or clothes or whatever it is. And just like what Mahatma Gandhi said, they really think that you are obligated to buy at their establishment. And sometimes instead that they make it look as though you are begging them. You're paying your money and they make it look as though you are begging them.
That is true. I think most of them, some of them try to be, how should I say, they try to work with consumers, they try to listen to their concerns. And of course you would have the strong-headed individuals. But you always have to pay attention to what the consumers, your customers are saying.
So while, Trista, you spoke in terms of, I know this is more about the consumer, and you spoke about consumer education, which is so important. Business education is important.
Yes, it
the
is.
Management of business, business management, how to run your business, that is also important. So does the department as well educate the supplier as much as it educates the consumer? Because even the supplier is a consumer. Let's face it, we're all consumers. Even the businessman is a consumer. The person who owns the store is a consumer.
Yes.
They're consuming too.
Yes, the businesses are very important. This year for our Consumer Affairs Week, we had a session in terms of educating the businesses, and it was dubbed "Businesses are consumers too." So yes, they are consumers. And as Mr. Quilly rightfully said, sometimes when we go to the business places, the management might give us a hard time. We are very stern with them. You know, I have had personally a businessman, a manager, actually stop speaking to me. But that didn't really, you know, because I'm doing my work. But over the time frame, he recognized that I was within my rights. So he came back and he apologized because he recognized what I was telling him about the way in which he operates his business and what complaints I've been getting and so forth. He actually recognized, and as I would say, matured enough now to recognize that the consumers would break you or they would make you, and you don't want any bad publicity. I can speak about Arthur Martin for Domino's. When I have any complaints about Domino's, or Mr. Martin would be, first Mr. Martin would say, I would tell him my complaints, call him, contact him, the complaints, go to there. And of course, Mr. Martin would, first he would thank me, because as he always say, he don't want to have one bad consumer review. He try his best to have everything. Can't have everything perfect, but that's the road he's taking. So I took liberty this afternoon to call him out, because when we go and we complain to him, he would tell us, thank you for the complaint. You know, I had a complaint pertaining to his establishment, and even when he was at a supermarket before, and he always thanked me, thank persons, and you know, so business managers, owners should feel, you know, the sense that we are coming to them with complaints and try to make it better for them instead of being upset with consumer affairs or with consumers. Yes. So they must find that it's a way we are trying to encourage them to elevate their business at a different level.
Because without the customer, you have no business.
Precisely.
Yeah. You have no business. Now, Mr. Quilly, the estimates, the bill deals with estimates for work to be completed. What can you say about that?
When you enter into an agreement with someone, most cases our estimates are word of mouth. I think we would advise consumers to get a written agreement from the individual who is about to do the work, because sometimes you may run into a situation where someone may issue an estimate for a certain price. And we do not want a situation where the person, after assessing the work, while you're gone and after they're giving you after they have given you an initial estimate, they come back and they say, after looking at this, I think it's going to be more. And this is when they already started doing the work. No, we cannot have a situation like that. So the person who is giving the estimate would have to issue an as accurate as possible estimate for the job that they're about to do. You cannot give the consumer one estimate, and then once you have started the work, you come back and you decide, oh, I'm going to make a killing now for this job, so I ain't got to work for the rest of the month. No, we cannot have that, and that is illegal.
But I might say that, take for example, a mechanic. The mechanic, you go to the mechanic and they have this issue with your vehicle. And further in doing their checks, they give you an estimate as to one sort of work. They recognize that something else is also wrong, and additional problems exist, and they recognize it. They must first point it out to you. They just don't go and do the work They would have to notify you as to what else they found before they actually start to bill you for or do the work, I must say. Because if I take my vehicle and something is wrong with the engine, you can't come tell me something is wrong with the wheel and charge me for it one time. You would have to notify me that this is the case, and I would say, okay, but I would encourage persons to do a written agreement, as Mr. Creeley said, even if it's to change anything on the estimate.
You know, I'm happy that you are mentioning this in terms of people that are involved in providing services, whether they be mechanics or plumbers or contractors or whomever, because you really have some of them out there who are very unscrupulous, extremely unscrupulous, and they're ripping you off in front of your face. Mechanics and so on. And you really have to do something to protect yourself.
Yes.
You have to have some sort of a protection against these unscrupulous players in the marketplace. They have no heart.
In terms of this estimates discussion, I would just like to read what the act says. Where a supplier has provided an estimate for you for any service or goods and services as contemplated in Section 107, the price for that service or goods and services must not exceed the estimate unless the supplier has informed the consumer of additional estimate charges and the consumer has authorized the work to continue. So you cannot just on your own decide this needs some more money for me to complete, and then you do it off of your own and you did not inform the consumer, because they would be in their rights not to honor your final bill. So you would always have to communicate to the consumer. They hired you to do a job. You would have to communicate with them if the job would require additional funds, and only unless they allow you or give you permission to continue working on whatever it is you're working on for them, you would be able to do so.
And I would encourage...
And should they also provide you, for example, you give me an estimate, but should they also provide you with the invoices so that you're able to see as well what they paid? Because many times they would have to go and buy the stuff. If you're fixing my car, you will have to go and get the part and so on to fix the car. Do I have a right at the end of the day to see the accumulation of invoices, what you paid for the parts and so on, so that I know that I am not being ripped off?
Of course, as we mentioned earlier, consumers have the right to information. You're paying them in the end for a job, so you need to know how much these items cost so that you will be aware that they're not trying to rip you off.
And as I was saying before, I would encourage consumers, when they have an estimate being done, I would encourage them, the person who's providing the service who gave them the estimate, to both of them sign on the said document and date it.
Yes.
It's very important. It's very, very important.
And that brings me to something else as well, in terms of the time to carry out the work. Suppose they say, well, look, it's going to take 3 weeks that, you know, for the person to complete the work, and 6 weeks work ain't finished. It speaks to what we were talking about before.
Yeah, they would have to inform you as to why the work has not been completed in the time frame that was specified. And then it would be up to the consumer if they actually want them to continue the process or they want to find somebody else to do the job according to what it is. Because If it's a situation where somebody is building a house for you and you end up in that sort of predicament, that might be a very tricky situation. But for smaller instances, smaller cases, you could decide to move on to someone else to get the job completed.
And if I decide to move on to someone else, that person can be, you know, bad-minded and probably do something to my thing too. You know what I mean? All of that is very possible, you know.
That is true, but it would be in your right as the consumer and the person who contracted that individual to do the job to move on to someone else if you're not getting what it is you were supposed to get.
And it all goes back to consumers knowing what their rights are so that they can protect themselves against a lot of fraud, misrepresentation, unscrupulous people out there, and so on. And that they must be getting the best in terms of the quality of goods and services that they are spending their money for.
Indeed.
Now, we are going to go to the phone lines and see what our listeners, what questions they have or comments. The numbers to call are 466-2666. That is 466-2666. The cell number is 662-8674. 662-8674. 767-4765. 767-4765. And the overseas number is 1-239-645-1500. That is 1-239-645-1500. We welcome your calls. Right. Now, the bill also deals with, Trista, restocking fees. Can you tell me what that is, the restocking fees?
Restocking fees are fees that suppliers, businesses, they charges you when you take back items that you purchase at their stores. Sometimes, or in most cases, I know the restocking fees would be because you, as the consumer, change your mind, or put it this way, you probably purchase too much. But with the restocking fees, it depends on the item, because some persons would say that they're not taking it back and others would charge you. Mr. Creeley has spoke about this before in terms of with you taking back items to consumers. The bill speaks of it.
In terms of restocking fees, we have a situation here where some persons charge restocking fees, I would say illegally. A restocking fee is basically there for you to recoup costs, like if someone returns an item and it's an open box, the item is not in a manner that it was originally.
Mr. Quilly, stick a pin there. We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon. We lost that caller. Working
hello.
for you, good afternoon.
Yeah, Mr. Lesroy. Lesroy.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, yeah, good afternoon. And good afternoon, Miss Teresa. And
Good
Mr.
afternoon.
Creeley.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, as usual, I'm listening here attentively. And I have something to say to consumers. Now, consumer affairs cannot tell the supplier what price to put on the goods because the supplier knows what expense he had to go to reach where he is. But what I'm saying now to the consumers, it is a wise thing to do if you're going to buy more than 1 or 2 or 3 items, to always have a picture mark down the cost on the shelf, and you add them up before you go to the cashier. Make sure you take the time and add them up, so that when you go to the cashier now and they check up everything and the total they give you is higher than yours, they say, no, something is wrong. Something is wrong here, because this here costs that, and that costs this, and this costs that. How you reach to that price? But you see, they get away with robbing customers, consumers, when you have a load of thing, 100 items in your basket, and they're hauling down, they're just swiping, whoop, and you put them in the bag, whoop, so they get away with that. Until you reach home, and then you say, no, something wrong here, and you check your receipt, and then you're able to see where they rob you. So it's always best, if you're going to buy more than 1 or 3 or 4 things, make sure you make a record of them, that you could show what this costs and what that costs. But with 1 and 2 items, they can't rob you. Because if you go up there and a bottle of Monge costs $5, and you go up there and they tell you, well, $7, you say no, and the shelf it costs $5. So my advice to consumers is make sure you check your goods at all times. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your call.
Have calculators, you could start adding up the prices of the items, so you wouldn't be surprised at the cash point as to what the price is. But as we were saying earlier, the prices would have to be on the shelves. Some of the items you look at, they don't have any price on them. So it would be important that the prices are on the shelves, so consumers are aware of what they would have to pay before they get to the cash point. And then they end up there, they don't have the sufficient funds, and they end up being embarrassed. Right? So it's important that the prices are on the shelf. I would not say that the businesses are trying to rob persons. I would say sometimes persons at the cash point, they make honest mistakes. Sometimes items get scanned twice. So you as a consumer would have to be vigilant as to what they're actually doing, because sometimes you might get double charged for an item and you didn't even realize. So
that is why it's always important for you to take your receipts and back check them when you get home.
And a number of us really don't do that. We don't back check our receipts. But you check your receipt against what you would have received. Because sometimes you might find you reach home, you have a receipt, something is on it, but yet you did not receive the good. How do you go back to the supermarket and say to them, well, I did not receive this good. It's on your receipt, but you didn't get it. You have nothing to prove because it's on the receipt and you did not get it. The person says, well, it's on your receipt.
Majority of these stores, well, these supermarkets, this has come up before. It has not been an issue from what I could see with these supermarkets, because once you use your frequent shopper number, they usually honor whatever claim you have when you go back to the store.
That is true. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, William and panel. A question. Suppose when a customer goes to the supermarket, the price on the shelf costs $5.80, and the system costs $3.75. What is that about that?
And the price in the system is low?
Low, yes.
Well, you will be paying you will be paying the lowest price?
No, you will pay the lowest price.
The highest price?
Well, it's on the shelf, you are giving the price on the shelf.
That is basically dual pricing. So
but they forget to change the price in the system.
Well, that is basically dual pricing. So if there are two prices on the item,
Yes.
you are going to be paying the lower of the two.
I pick up the one that's at 580.
Yes, but
I start up at the 580.
what I'm saying is there are two prices linked to the item. So
Yes.
that falls under dual pricing, and under that it states that if there are two items, two prices linked to an item or affixed to an item, the consumer is entitled to pay the lesser of the two.
Either way, it doesn't matter which way. Okay.
But I'm trying to figure out why would you want to pay the most expensive out of the two?
Huh?
But why would you want to pay the most expensive out of the two?
Well-
You indicated that on the shelf it's 580,
Yeah.
and when they reach the cashier it is 375. I think you would have been happy to pay the 375.
Finance.
You wouldn't be happy to pay the 375?
No, just showing a reference. I just call this for a reference, that's all.
Oh, maybe if you had switched it the other way in terms of 375 on the shelf and 580s in the register, you would pay the 375 because it's on the shelf.
Okay.
Okay, caller, thank you. Thank you so much for your interest in calling in. Now,
Wait, before you continue, I want to get back to the restocking fee.
yes.
The restocking fee is not supposed to be something that is geared at preventing consumers from returning something. It is supposed to be there for the business to recoup the costs of you basically opening a product and it not having it in a state that it was sold to you in. It is not there for you to deter the consumer from returning an item to your premises. So,
Okay, now the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, who were here last week, they spoke to what you call metrology or measurement. And you know, in certain cases, people have to, whether the sugar or where the flour or where the fish or whatever the case is. And you can be disadvantaged if that scale is off balance. So the whole thing about, and sometimes do people have fake weights. Fake weights.
well,
Is that a fair trading practice? It's not.
the question would be, how do you know they have fake weights? How can you prove that? But in terms of the scales, the Bureau of Standards conduct regular calibration exercises of scales at supermarkets, and they even calibrate gas pumps to make sure you're getting the right amount of gas that you paid for. But the Consumer Affairs Department does not really partake in those sort of things. The Bureau of Standards, they
I know that's right. But the point is, though, both departments are somehow related.
Right, we work closely together. If we get a complaint over a scale, we would have to, as I said before, when you ask for outside assistance, well, this is internal assistance. We are asking for help from the competent authority to find out if the scales at this establishment are actually calibrated properly. When was the last time they were calibrated? Maybe they need redoing, because we had consumers complaining of high prices at a certain place. So we would ask for their assistance, and they would check the scales and report back to us as to what is going on with them.
You know, at one point I was concerned. I used to buy coconut water, and there were one or two times that I could swear that this was not just pure coconut water. Either it had water added to it or sugar or something like that. There are some people out there, they're trying to stretch the things so that they can get more money off of you. And they're not really thinking in terms of the consumer. They are thinking in terms of how they can make money through dishonest means. So I agree with you, Mr. Quealy, that yes, we understand that in a business environment, most persons will be fair. And most persons want to offer you the best goods that they can and the best service. But there are unscrupulous people out there whose intent is not so much the welfare of the consumer, but their own welfare. Now it must be both. It must be both. I want the best for you, you want the best for me. And that is how it is. That is why I come to your business. I come to your business because I want to provide me with the best service and the best goods. I didn't come to you so that you can try to be smart and rip me off.
Yes,
and the bill must deal heavily with those things when you have people who are not really working in the interests of the health and safety and the life and the protection of those things of the consumer.
But in terms of going back to what you mentioned with the jelly water, just as an example, we mentioned
before you go there, so what I started to do is that you are not going to sell me any jelly water in a bottle, they think. I want to see you to pour the jelly water where I am there.
Mr. Williams, you're so right, because that happened to me one time, and ever from since that, I'm asking them to pour in, to open the jellies them right there. Don't give me none that you have put down. Give me them, open it right there and throw it in front of my eyes.
Yeah, but as we mentioned earlier, you have to inform the consumer what is in this product. You cannot just put in something else in there because you may feel like, oh, it's going to give it a nice flavor. Or it would stretch the product, as you said. Because the consumer may be allergic to certain things. They don't know what's in there. You cannot just throw whatever you want in there because you could possibly make this person go to the hospital, or you could make them die, and then you could end up put yourself in problems because you could end up get a lawsuit.
Pour it in front of me. Pour it in front of me. Yeah, do not take it out of a cooler and give it to me already poured. I want to see you to pour the jelly water in front of me.
I agree.
In the Dominican Republic, where spend time and so on, that is what I see them do. They open the jelly in front, they cut it, and they pour it. You bring your mug, and they pour it in the mug. People up to a lot of tricks. Okay, what can you tell us, Mr. Quealy, in terms of warranties?
Warranties.
Both implicit and implied.
Okay. Implied warranty is the notion that the consumer is entitled to have a period of using the product without any interruption or side effects. It is not written anywhere. It is just, as it says, implied. The explicit warranty speaks to when you buy a product and it has a warranty card in it, which sets out the terms and conditions of how the warranty is supposed to run. In the absence of that card, an implied warranty will come in place, and the period for this implied warranty is 6 months. We have businesses around town. In the absence of proper legislation, everybody would do what it is they want to do. So they would have a warranty period of like 48 hours. And that is unacceptable. So the bill is setting out how warranties are supposed to run. If a product comes with a warranty card inside, as I mentioned, is an explicit warranty, the person selling this item would have to honor the warranty. They like to tell you, you would have to call the manufacturer if something goes wrong with it. No. You are the person selling the item. you're basically acting as like a middleman to redistribute the product to a consumer. So you are responsible if anything goes wrong with this item.
To send it back to the...
Right.
Okay.
The consumer is not responsible for that. And as I said, if there is not this card in the product, an implied warranty would come in place, and it is still basically this, would still follow the same procedure.
Mr. Quilly, what I see some places doing is that they are taking money from you. So they will tell you, well, this thing has a 2-year warranty, and so you have to put down this amount of money for the 2-year warranty. Just in case anything goes wrong with it, it is insured and all of this kind of thing. I see that actually happening. Is that correct?
I'm unaware of putting down money for a warranty. You put down money for insurance.
Well, it's a smart way.
I would have to speak to like how I've seen it with the US. You can opt to have these extended warranties that you pay for. I have not seen that in St. Kitts, and even in the US you can opt to not have it. You don't. It's not mandatory that you have it. They just tell you it's sometimes it might be a wise choice to do it. Sort of like Apple Care with your iPhone. But yeah, we have not come across this in St. Kitts as yet. But if it becomes something that is prevalent, of course we would have to put legislation in place to really address it.
So if I buy a watch, and it says it came with a warranty card saying that the watch has a 5-year warranty on it. Something goes bad with the watch, not through my doing, through defect or whatever the case might be. If I bought it from courts, I must take it back to courts. That's what you're saying.
Right.
And they will have to deal with that.
Courts would be aware of when you purchase the watch, and once the time period and the warranty has not expired, they would be obligated to repair the product.
But some of them tell you, Mr. Quilly, that this warranty does not apply to St. Kitts and Nevis. It only applies to the US, where the watch comes from. I have heard that. The warranty does not apply down here. It applies if you were in the US, but it doesn't apply in St. Kitts and Nevis. So when the watch, something happens to the watch, that's it.
I am unaware of that. If you purchase an item, well, the warranty is only applicable if you're in the States. Well, how come you could purchase the item and you're not in the States?
Good, but I'm telling you some of the things that are out there.
But then the suppliers would have gotten the warranty period from where they purchased it. So if anything goes wrong with the item, that, let's take for example, it wasn't sold to you as yet, but something happens to it while in store, they would send it back.
Yes, that's why it's very important for people to know.
Yes.
You see, sometimes these retailers, they are not really authorized dealers for certain products as well. I will give you an example of like Pandora jewelry. If a woman purchases something from Pandora and something goes wrong with it, the store here that is the authorized dealer for it will fix it without cost, because that is under the terms and agreement.
Yes.
But when you have a store who is doing basically like, as we say, a side hustle, and trying to pass it off as they are authorized dealers for something, they would not be able to provide you with the appropriate level of protection for your item.
So that is important for the consumers to know. Indeed. That you need to really go to authorized places for certain things, for example, Invicta watches.
Whenever possible. Whenever possible, but as long as we were saying, as long as the item has a warranty card and you are selling the item, you are basically functioning as a middleman for the manufacturer. So if something goes wrong with that item, the consumer has only one place to go, and that is to you, who sold them the item. So you cannot turn them away. You, as the seller, will have to then contact the person that you purchased the item from and find out how you can have it repaired for the consumer.
Yes, you know, sometimes there are people just who are on the streets, they're selling watches, they're selling all kinds of things. So you are saying then that you are not really protected in that way if you're just buying something from somebody on the street, selling an item. So, for example, they're selling a Citizen watch. They're hustling on the street, and you buy a watch from them. You're not really protected with any sort of a recourse to warranties and that.
No, you're not. So you're basically taking a risk to get a lower price. You get a lower price for the watch, but if something happens to it, you know you might not be compensated for what has happened to the item.
And as Mr. Creedy spoke about the Pandora's products, we have on our Facebook page, because we received a letter from Pandora itself telling Consumer Affairs, there are only 2 authorized dealers in St. Kitts. So the other stores that are selling Pandora, they're taking a risk. They're taking a risk. So anything happens to their Pandora, some person might say it turns on their skin, you know, it leaves a rash or whatever. If you did not purchase it from these 2 entities, then Pandora is not responsible.
Yes. Okay. Just one more question before we leave. You mentioned in terms of having your officers who are important in department to go out and to do their due diligence, checking out at supermarkets and so on to ensure that the consumer is protected. And if the consumer is not, where possible, giving fines and things like that. Now, who protects the officers?
Well, protection...
Because they might be open to abuse.
Protection in this case is legal protection, basically. When the officers are in the field conducting exercises, they're not there off of their own linemen. They're performing a function for the government.
They're there by law.
Right. So persons cannot interfere with them, obstruct them from performing their duties, or be trying to threaten them. We've had instances where the officers are doing their jobs and persons are saying, like, we would sue you. But you cannot sue an officer for performing their duties, all right? And persons need to be aware of that. Sometimes persons say these things because of ignorance. Maybe they are embarrassed that we are pulling a lot of expired item off their shelf. So they just say that for saying its sake. But as I said, once the officers are conducting their duties, they are conducting their duties on behalf of the government, and an officer cannot be obstructed from performing their duties.
And they have to have proper identification to show that they're actually doing this work on behalf of the government. So proper ID.
Yes, and we have that.
Right. Anything else before we leave? We're out of time.
Well, I would just like to say the bill is not intended to take money out of anybody's pocket. It is there to protect consumers and businesses alike, protect the interests of consumers, making sure they're getting value for money, and to protect the businesses from possible lawsuits, from having hazardous material, expired items on their shelves. And it is geared at elevating the standard of doing business in St. Kitts. So that is what we should take away from this.
Thank you. Trista?
Just want to continue to ask consumers to know what they're purchasing, to educate themselves on their rights and responsibilities. We have outside there that some consumers will tell you that they don't have time to read on the items what they're purchasing, but we would encourage you. This is your best shot at making sure you're consuming healthy products, products that you won't be allergic to. So we encourage persons to read. We encourage persons to save their receipts in case of any faults or that they would have to go back to the purchase. We encourage persons to, when you see a sale, to actually know, check the items, read the labels, make sure that the products that you're purchasing are not expired. And I can tell you, most of the times, when you see items go on sale, it has to be a reason. They might tell you they have too much in stock, but you still need to check the expiration dates. And sometimes, as I said before, we've came across cases in which they're actually selling expired stuff.
At a lower price.
At a lower price. So I encourage persons, once they see the sign sale, to make sure that they check the products, read the products, check for expiration dates, educate themselves.
Right. Thank you so much. And we end on that word of education. Consumer education. Consumers must ensure that they are educated in terms of their rights so that they are not abused by those persons who are offering a service to them. Thank you so much, Mr. Wheely, Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and Trista Watley Stennett, Senior Consumer Affairs Officer. I end by saying what I did in the beginning, that we are all consumers, and we have to think in terms of the protection of our lives, our safety, and our health. That is most important. Thanks to all of our callers to today's program and our listeners. We continue to appreciate you from week to week. Next week we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams. Take good care.